Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our 6th Lincoln anniversary at Lincoln Institute's 75th anniversary. This is the 6th dialogue we're doing as part of this anniversary year. And we're showcasing the important work that the Lincoln Institute does on land policy issues. And we are featuring prominent guests, such as our two guests with us today, Congressman Stanton and Kathryn Sorensen, that I'll introduce a bit more in a minute. So these are both guests that are engaged in prominent challenges that we're facing. But before we begin, I just want to share a few words about the Lincoln Institute. So we began with a simple but powerful idea that was championed by the political economist Henry George in the late 1800s. That was that by freeing communities from land speculation, governments can unlock opportunities that enable everyone to thrive. So our founder, John C. Lincoln, turned this idea into a living legacy and created what would become the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in 1946. So one, we're working to affect change through better land and water management, and we're focusing on 6 goals, and those include land and water sustainability, addressing climate change, and reducing poverty and inequality. So we conduct research, we provide training and technical assistance, we convene leaders and practitioners, and we do webinars such as this. So our work focuses on North America, Latin America, Asia, and we're just beginning some programs in Africa. So Lincoln Institute's Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy was created in 2017 to advance the integration of land and water management in order to meet the current and future water needs of the Colorado River Basin communities, economies, and the environment. So that brings us to today's program. So Congressman Greg Stanton and Dr. Kathryn Sorensen are with me to discuss the challenges that we must face for a sustainable future in our desert communities, and what are the lessons that the two of them have learned through their years of experience. So I'm honored to be joined by both of them because they have led so many efforts throughout their careers. So we'll do brief introductions here, and you'll see longer introductions in the chat for all of our participants. So Congressman Greg Stanton is in his second term in Congress, He previously served as the mayor of Phoenix and deputy attorney general of Arizona, and he has a law degree from the University of Michigan. So Congressman Stanton, welcome. Dr. Kathryn Sorensen is the director of research at Arizona State University's Kyl Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute and a professor of practice. She previously served as director of water and wastewater services, or I should say water services for the city of Phoenix, and she holds a PhD in agriculture and resource economics from Texas A&M University. So Kathryn, welcome as well.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. And so I'm Jim Hallway. I'll be moderating our discussion today. I've been in the middle of water and land management issues in Arizona since 1993, and it's been my privilege to lead the Babbitt Center since we were founded nearly 5 years ago. So a few quick housekeeping notes. Number one is that Congress is in session, and there's lots of busy, important work that Congressman Stanton's in the middle of, so he may occasionally have to disappear for a few minutes for a vote or committee work, and then he will pop back in. But we will have him here for most of our conversation. And we know that he's doing important things when he disappears. So in terms of interaction, you can use the Q&A feature within Zoom to send us questions. I'll be watching that, and one of my colleagues will be watching that, and we will feed some of your questions back into the conversation as we go. We also, as I mentioned, will periodically be posting information in the chat and links to resources that we think might relate to the conversation we're having. So unfortunately, with the way Zoom is set up, you are not able to save the chat. But what we will do is within, at the most, probably about 2 days, the recording will be up, and everyone who's registered, we will send you an email with the link to the recording and links to all the chats that were shared, all the information in the chat. So if you're having any technical issues, submit those in the Q&A, and the Lincoln Institute staff will try to deal with that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Congressman, I wanted to start with you and ask you, what do you see as the major long-term challenges to sustainability, and particularly the kind of challenges we face in arid regions like Phoenix?
All right, Jim. Well, first, let me just say thanks for hosting this. And I'm really excited that Lincoln Institute is focusing in on water and the challenges and opportunities of water in the state of Arizona today. There's no more important subject facing the future of our state. I want to say thank you to the Lincoln family that's done so much to support our community over so many decades. And Lincoln Institute of Land Policy is a part of that family legacy. And to my friend Kathryn Sorensen, who I had a chance to work with for so many years when I was mayor, and she ran the water department in the city of Phoenix. Great to see you again. And what I love about Kathryn is that not only is she an expert on water, but she loves to push the envelope in positive ways, challenge the status quo to make sure that we are making smart choices on water. She did that for me when I was mayor, and I think we did some very innovative things as a result. And I know she's going to challenge this audience. And also the entire state, because we've got some big decisions to make. Jim, this is the best of times and the worst of times on the important issues we're going to cover today. Look, Arizona is the fastest growing state in the country. We are doing economic development at levels we have never done before. You see the incredible jobs that are being created at Intel and TSMC and so many other entities that are investing literally billions in the state of Arizona, creating thousands and thousands of jobs. People are voting with their feet to come to the state of Arizona. That is really a great thing for our community. But at the same time, the impact of climate change is hitting Arizona harder than any other place in the country. And I know there's so much discussion about rising sea levels, et cetera, in other locations, and it's bad everywhere. But in Arizona, extreme heat, the increased number of and intensity of the forest fires, and of course, the drought. And there's a direct line between climate change and all of these challenges. So the status quo won't do it anymore. We have to challenge ourselves. We have wonderful laws in place that we're going to talk about today, but guess what? They're not good enough. We have to do even more and have the political will and courage to take on some entrenched interests as we are smarter and more innovative as we deal with these issues at a time when the country is divided, often divided between rural and urban interests. That's exactly the interests that need to come together and partner and even compromise if we are going to solve our water challenges for the future. So I look forward to a very thorough debate, a challenging debate, but most importantly, some significant action items that we can take as we work to solve. This is a solvable issue, but we can't rest on our laurels. We can't just go with the status quo in order to solve our water challenges in Arizona.
I had myself muted. So Congressman, you spent 15 years as a mayor and a councilman for the city of Phoenix, and now you're in the middle of your second term in Congress. I'm interested in any thoughts you may have on how has your perspective changed as you've gone from the local to the national stage?
Well, I think the honest answer is not really much at all. I mean, I've been a pretty broken record on the issues that I have made my priority during my time in leadership. As mayor of the city of Phoenix, what did I focus in on? Infrastructure and infrastructure investment, trade, international trade, particularly with Mexico and Central and Latin America, and immigration reform. And then I became a leader with the support of Kathryn and so many others on the issue of sustainability and water planning. And those are literally exactly the issues that I'm focusing on in Congress. And obviously the perspective is a little bit different, I guess, coming from the federal level, but the issues are the same. It's why I sought a seat on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, so I can continue my work, making sure we invest in those areas. And by the way, we're not talking about it today, but it maybe another subject matter is our challenges with China and the economic challenges we have with China. We're going to win that challenge, but only if we invest in our infrastructure, do more on climate change, and invest in education. So that hasn't changed at all. And immigration, I've been a champion, will continue to be a champion of immigration reform. No state will better benefit than the state of Arizona once we pass comprehensive immigration reform. And on the issue of trade, as I mentioned, look, I was one of the early adopters on the Democratic side of the aisle in terms of a modernized trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, now known as USMCA. It's the right thing to do, and Arizona is going to take full advantage on that. And obviously, sustainability and climate change policy, that's where we have to do more at the federal level. We've taken some steps backwards, and the United States really needs to reestablish its leadership on the issue. The infrastructure bill that we passed is good, but another bill that we have passed in the House, and hopefully the Senate will pass soon, Build Back Better, would be the largest climate change investment that we've ever made in American history, $600 billion. It's actually the largest portion of the Build Back Better agenda. And we have to step up to the plate and do more. And I hope and pray we can get our friends in the Senate to do the right thing and pass that bill.
All right, thank you, Congressman. So Kathryn, what's on the top of your list for the sustainability challenges we face, and then maybe for some of the other issues the Congressman's just brought up?
Yeah, sure. Well, certainly the Colorado River is in crisis. The river is over allocated, meaning that the farms, the tribes, the industries that all collectively rely on the river use more water than the real river can really provide on a long-term basis. And of course, compounding this, as the Congressman mentioned, is 22 years of drought and minimal snowpack in the Rockies. As a result of that, we've been living off of storage in the two largest reservoirs on the Colorado River system, Lakes Powell and Meade. And water levels in those reservoirs have declined to historic lows. So that's obviously hugely problematic, not only here in Arizona, but across the Colorado River Basin. Climate change is going to make that situation worse. The scientists are telling us that we can expect the flows of the Colorado River to decline by as much as 25-30% in the future. So that's a huge challenge for all of us, including the Republic of Mexico, which shares the river with us. I think also groundwater management is another huge challenge here in the Southwest for sure, but also really across the country and across the globe. In many communities, we see the depletion of fossil aquifers. Fossil aquifers are aquifers that don't receive significant natural recharge. And when we pump fossil aquifers, we really put ourselves in a situation where we're squandering opportunities for future generations. And that's not to say we should never pump fossil aquifers, but we certainly need to make sure that when we do that, the use of them is worth the depletion that's caused. Because that is really problematic for future generations. Where possible, we should be looking to the use of renewable supplies in place of pumping fossil aquifers, reclaimed water, for example. And of course, we should be trying to recharge these aquifers. But those are difficult and expensive undertakings. And as a result, I think we do see depletion of aquifers across the globe. And that's just a huge problem. And then last, as the Congressman mentioned, I want to talk about infrastructure because you really can't overstate the importance of infrastructure. Across the Southwest, across the US, we simply must do a better job of investing in the rehabilitation and replacement of aging water and sewer infrastructure. A lot of people want to talk about sustainability in terms of natural systems and green infrastructure, and that's great. And I hope that we can do more on that front. But at the end of the day, if you want to deliver safe, clean water to homes and businesses, that's a proposition that requires concrete, iron, and steel, pumps and pipelines, wells, reservoirs, treatment plants. In this country, people want the infrastructure that enables the delivery of safe, clean water, but they aren't always willing to pay for it. And that's a huge disconnect and a huge problem.
So Kathryn, I know you recently participated in a session that was titled Time to Get Real, Challenges Facing the Basin. And you've just run through, I think, a list of kind of your priorities for that. But I'm curious, did any conclusions come from that conversation? Any sense of how we're doing at the moment on meeting those challenges?
I feel as though we are rising to the challenge. I think we're doing pretty well. The situation is dire. The situation is critical, but I think there is a broad recognition that that's the case. The lower basin states and the Republic of Mexico came up with a plan in 2019 to cut water use and leave water in Lake Mead to really try to mitigate, the risk of Lake Mead falling to really disastrous levels. That was called the Drought Contingency Plan. And here we are just 2 years later, and there's, again, broad recognition that maybe the Drought Contingency Plan wasn't enough, and we need to do more. And in a very short period of time, the state of Arizona and California and Nevada all came together and came up with a plan to save even more water and to put even more water up in Lake Mead to avoid the possibility of very significant declines. So I think that kind of collaboration and proactive planning should really be lauded. And meanwhile, local municipal water managers have been busy making contingency plans for receiving less Colorado River water. And they've been planning proactively to use alternative supplies, such as reclaimed water and others, and building the infrastructure necessary to make sure that families will receive water at the tap, even in really bad scenarios on the Colorado River. So yeah, I think people are coming together, but the challenge is a huge one. And at the end of the day, Mother Nature is in charge. So we have yet to see if our human efforts will be able to overcome those.
Thank you. And Congressman, as you mentioned right at the beginning, one of the things we all very much appreciate about working with Kathryn is she understands the issues deeply, and she's willing to call a spade and tell us what we need to do. But as you kind of look from the congressional perspective, anything you would like to add in terms of how are we doing on facing these challenges?
Kathryn said it very well, and she provided a positive outlook on our ability to make the policy changes in order to meet these challenges. And she is a leader on that. I mean, make no mistake. She has ruffled a few feathers over the years, spoken truth to water powers, if you will, challenge even myself and the city council to do more at a local and municipal level. And I hope we have a chance to talk about that on today's discussion. But the truth is, even more needs to be done. And I think she's right. DCP was a good win. We were able to get it through Congress in a very short period of time, but we've already reached tier 1 shortage, and we're fast approaching higher levels of tier shortage. So really important and difficult decisions need to be made. And no one can point the finger at anyone else and say it's someone else's responsibility. The federal government needs to do more to step up to the plate to support, for example, tribal water settlements. We need to do even more to support water infrastructure so that we can move recycled water more efficiently. So important in the state of Arizona. We need to do more even at the local level. In fact, that's one of my challenges here today is to other local leaders is you should look in the mirror and say, what more can we be doing as a city? In the case of Phoenix, we took part of our water rate and used it for system conservation outside of the boundaries of the city of Phoenix, including things like helping to help better manage the forest with the National Forest Foundation and many other creative things. And so there are opportunities for all of us to step up to the plate and do more. And it's time to stop protecting our turf, if you will. City of Phoenix, for example, could say, hey, we're in a pretty good water situation, so we're fine. We don't have to worry about it. But the truth is that if our farmers aren't doing well in rural Arizona, if our tribal communities aren't doing well and don't have access to the water that they need to survive and thrive, then we're not doing well as a state, and Phoenix won't do well either. We are all in this together. And I think sometimes leadership means looking everybody in the eye and say, we need to do more. We need to trust each other, and we need to do more. And I think that's one of the big challenges with water is that there may not be the trust necessary for the compromises to be made. That has to change fast in order for us to meet the moment, this crisis that we're facing right now.
Congressman, thank you. And I think both of you make very good points that we do have a lot we need to do. We are well positioned, though, from our history of working together on water challenges to meet those. In a minute here, I want to sort of pivot to some of the lessons learned from both of your time in Phoenix. But before we do that, we did have a question in the chat, Kathryn, asking for your perspective on the 500,000 plan for the lower basin. And this may be also an opportunity. Let's add into the chat, if we haven't already, the story map that your group just turned out. And then let's add in the Babbitt Center story map as well, that's more general Colorado basin education, and you zeroed right in on this question. So Kathryn, share us your perspective on what's happening.
Well, like I said, the states, the lower basin states and the Republic of Mexico came together in 2019 and agreed on what's called the Drought Contingency Plan. That was basically a plan to save some water in Lake Mead and mitigate the risk of Lake Mead falling to critically low levels or heaven forbid, dead pool. But 2 years of really horrible snowpack followed. And it's now clear that the water delivery cuts contemplated in the drought contingency plan are just not enough. And this really shouldn't come as a surprise, I think, to anyone. Scientists have been telling us that the flows of the river are declining and that the basin is aridifying. The 500 plus plan is a plan to basically leave an additional 500,000 acre feet in Lake Mead above and beyond the water that was planned to be cut under the drought contingency plan. So to put that in perspective, for Arizona, that means that we will essentially forego deliveries of something on the order of 750,000 acre feet of water off the Colorado River. That's out of a 2.8 million acre foot entitlement. So it's a big number. It's going to cause a lot of pain. The 500 plus plan will be met mainly with voluntary contributions through people who are willing to be compensated to leave water in Lake Mead. That will be painful. That will mean that there will be farms that go fallow. There will be economic activities that are not undertaken, and it will entail a lot of expense. And water users in Central Arizona will have to pay for that. But overall, it's not good or bad. It's what we have to do. It's really clear that the lower basin has to use less water. So I view it in that context as a very necessary step.
So one other resource I'd add to people, and I would also point out that I just had a chance to look at the Kyl Center's story map on the 500 plus plan, and it's a pretty comprehensive look. So I encourage folks to go look at that. The other thing you might look at is, so if you go to the Central Arizona Project website, the last board meeting spent quite a bit of time talking about the 500 plan plus, and you'll see that. So the other hat I wear is I am a member of the Central Arizona Project board, and we got into a discussion that is near and dear to my heart, which is, yes, we have to do with this, but we have some important questions we need to grapple with of who's going to pay and how are we going to pay for it, that we need to give more attention to. Well, I'm going to go ahead and switch us a little bit to the lessons learned from Phoenix, and I'll start with going back to you, Kathryn. So you served for a number of years as the Director of Water Services, where you were over water and wastewater. And so what are some of the key lessons you learned from that time?
Well, let me just say it was fun. It was the privilege of a lifetime to serve as the Phoenix Water Director. And I certainly enjoyed serving alongside then Mayor Stanton, now Congressman Stanton, in that capacity. It was fun, but also very challenging. So yes, lots of lessons learned. Running Phoenix Water Services entails a lesson every single day. There were constant operational challenges, financial problems, political entanglements, human resource difficulties. But it was like putting together a puzzle every single day. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But I guess in terms of lessons learned, I would say that for many years before I became a utility director, I worked on the policy side of water resource issues. I worked to secure and protect water portfolios. And I was blessed to work on a few of the Indian water rights settlements here in Arizona. So coming from that policy perspective, what a great lesson I learned was the overwhelming importance of the infrastructure. Again, the pipes and the wells and the reservoirs and the pumps. That was a surprise to me coming from a policy perspective. And of course, the acquisition and protection of water supplies is very important and very expensive. But what's more important and more expensive is the infrastructure. So that was a great lesson learned for me. And it's one of the reasons why I've pushed so hard for investment in infrastructure. Because really it's hidden underneath our streets. It's hidden behind Homeland Security protected walls. People don't generally understand the importance of infrastructure, but it's absolutely necessary to the delivery of safe, clean water. And that's one of the reasons I was really grateful to work with Congressman Stanton when he was mayor of the city of Phoenix. He understood that value and the need to continue to invest in that infrastructure, and was willing to take the political risks necessary to be a leader on that front.
All right, thank you. Congressman, what lessons would you like to share a bit more from your time as mayor, or maybe what you're seeing as the challenges faced by other cities that you now come to you in Congress?
Okay, well, Kathryn went through a lot of great things that she had a chance to work on as a leader of our water department. She did not talk about the scars that she has from all of the battles on city council when she would ask for a slight water rate increase in order to pay for the infrastructure that we needed to deliver water to the people of Phoenix. But let me tell you one lesson. The people of the city want good infrastructure, and they are willing to pay for good infrastructure. And often there would be a lot of drama associated with slight water rate increases that the department was asking for in order to deliver on that. But the truth is that politically, it ended up not being nearly the issue that some people tried to make it. They were trying to politicize investment in infrastructure, but the people of the city, in a bipartisan way, want strong infrastructure. Now, the other lesson that I would say I learned was that the role and responsibility of cities, particularly a city of the size of Phoenix, the largest city in the state, one of the largest in the country, the role and responsibility that we have does not stop at the boundaries of the city. We have a larger responsibility to show leadership, to help, by example, help to solve some of the water challenges in our state. That's what Kathryn challenged me and our city council to do, was to think bigger. And so when we did create a Colorado River Resiliency Fund, we were taking that precious water rate and not just spending it on infrastructure in our city or water delivery in our city. She challenged us to spend our water rate, that monthly bill that people pay, spend it on things like forest management in partnership with SRP and the National Forest Foundation. She challenged us to work with SRP to use existing wells instead of always digging new wells, which is from an environmental perspective, a very smart thing to do. She challenged us to work directly as a city with our tribal partners on some of these challenging water issues. And of course, challenge us to help provide resources so that we could create some of the conservation necessary for the 500,000 acre feet that was talked about earlier. I wish that more cities would think in that regard. It's not, I mean, City of Phoenix happens to be the largest city, but every city in the valley, and frankly, every city throughout the state, should look in the mirror and say, we need to be part of the solution too. That our responsibility as a municipal water utility, even some of the private utilities that provide service to other cities, we have a larger responsibility to solve these water challenges. And so we sometimes had to bang down the door, and some of the long-standing water interests didn't like the fact that City of Phoenix was kind of banging on the door to be in the room when these decisions were being made. But we were willing to come the right way with resources to support some of our policy ideas, and we're willing to partner with the rural interests and agricultural interests, and partner with our tribal interests to say the larger water issues impact all of us, and we need to be a leader in that regard. And so I think that was one of the big lessons learned, is that cities do have a unique role and responsibility that they haven't played so far in kind of long-term water planning in our state, and they need to step up and do more. And the state interests and even some of the federal interests need to be welcoming to allow cities to play a larger role in solving our water challenges.
So Congressman, I appreciate that. And I think where both of you are taking us to is a topic I'd like to address a bit more, which is the whole governance and leadership question. Personally, I believe that our ability to govern ourselves is really the greatest challenge we face, and it seems to be getting more difficult today. And how do we as leaders or as public who talk to our leaders and vote for our leaders bring a greater focus on what are our needs and what do we have to do to address them and solve them. So Congressman, I'm curious if there's any other advice you may have for other elected officials, other mayors that are in positions similar to you, other national elected officials that are ways they can be more effective leaders in this realm.
Man, that is a really challenging question in these unique times that we are living in. And I say that as someone that was on the House floor on January 6th of this year, about to give a speech in defense of the Arizona election, because the Arizona election was the one that was being challenged on the House floor. And unfortunately, right at that moment when I was about to give my speech, is when we had to close things down because the insurrectionists were banging on the doors and putting our health at risk and trying to overthrow our government because of this incredible divide that we have. These are certainly challenging times. And I know in this modern political era where I guess, you know, if you're involved in politics, there's a challenge to try to get more Twitter followers or become famous by saying bombastic things about people you work with. There are short-term political benefits from behaving that way. But people watching this event right now know that the real challenges that we are facing, the longer term challenges we are facing, don't get solved by creating further division. In fact, we can only solve these issues by working in a bipartisan way. And water may be the ultimate challenge of our skill sets about whether we really can come back together as leaders, as elected officials, as community leaders, in a bipartisan way to really say we can do this and solve our challenges. And when you say, I mean, look, I can only speak for myself. I'm not perfect in this regard, but man, I try to lead by example. You know, I try not. You don't see me on TV on any of the super partisan channels trying to say bombastic things. I don't try to get Twitter followers by saying negative things about people, because those are people I need to work with in order to advance the issues that the real Arizonans care about, these long-term challenges that we have. And, you know, I've been around this business for a long time, over 20 years now in public service, in elected office. And, you know, my staying power, if you will, I think is really based on building that reputation as someone that is willing to, you know, people might always agree with the decisions I make, but they really think I'm in it for the right reasons and believe in public service and the benefits it can bring. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but I just, you can tell I'm a little bit frustrated by some of the things I witness in the political realm these days really aren't advancing our country or our state or our community.
It's certainly easy to understand that as we all witness it. And I think one of the things that's been unique about water historically is, I'm not going to say water is not political, but it's always been a stakeholder politics. Rural cities versus urban cities, this city versus that city, mines and agriculture in cities with competing interests. That's a lot easier to deal with than our typical partisan politics that almost become religion. And I think we need to work hard to keep water out of the partisan realm and work together on it. So Kathryn, we certainly know that you have earned some scars in political battles, and the mayor pointed those out. Yeah, there you go. We got to get the love. But you probably didn't get a lot of love for your rate increase. Well, maybe you did from your staff, who could then use that money to build the infrastructure that we would need. But from your perspective, what do water managers need from both the elected officials and the unelected community leaders?
You know, I think they need to spend the time to understand the issues, and that's asking a lot. Because elected officials, community leaders are crazy busy, and they have to deal with a plethora of issues that the rest of us don't have to deal with. But water and sewer are so important to public health and to our economies and to our quality of life, that I think they need to spend the time to understand those issues and their vital importance to communities. I think that means listening to technical experts, certainly, but I think it also means questioning them. And I know that was something that Congressman Stanton was never shy about, was questioning us and making sure that he was doing his due diligence to understand what we were, advising. I think that elected officials should listen to the stakeholders, but question them as well. And they should listen to the citizens and the taxpayers, all of them, but question them. I think that coming to these issues with a critical eye is hugely important. And I think that both our elected officials and community leaders will make better decisions when they question everybody. Listening to everyone who has expertise on the matter, but then forming their own opinions based on those broad perspectives. Elected officials in particular, they are elected to take all of those considerations into account and then strike the right balance and find the common ground and find the right compromises that can lead to sound, reasonable decisions that can actually be implemented on the ground. And that's a challenge. It's easy for me to say these things, much more difficult to do them. There is no more low-hanging fruit, or at least very little low-hanging fruit when it comes to water sustainability. All of the choices before us are difficult, they're expensive, they're politically complicated. And our community leaders, our elected officials, they're going to need to take risks and find ways that are tricky, but find ways to find the least worst solutions, because most of the feel good, easy choices, the win-win solutions, those are already gone. So I think it's going to take a lot of listening, a lot of spending the time on the issues to really understand them, and then finding what common ground there is that might still be out there. Those are difficult things.
I just want to jump in on that. I mean, I think Kathryn says it well. Look, the status quo is not acceptable. It is simply impossible for us to continue to be the fastest growing state in terms of population, continue with the exciting economic growth that we have seen, particularly in the urban centers, continue with all of the agricultural activities that we've done, meet the needs of our tribal communities, including the settlements that need to occur and improved by Congress, because that's going to change the landscape of what we do. Continue to just have unregulated use of groundwater throughout the state of Arizona, and wish this thing away. That simply is not going to occur. But we also can't do it in a way in which we pit urban interests versus rural, or tribal versus home building, or whatever industry it might be. We can't pit interests against each other. And to the extent that in some ways, the battle between urban and rural areas, not just in Arizona, but around the country, is sort of a euphemism for partisanship, we have to get away from that. It truly has to be shared sacrifice, and we don't have a moment to waste. So my challenge really moving forward is that we need to get back in a room together ASAP, not just the water professionals, the real political leaders, and make the tough choices now. We don't have any time to waste in that regard, and everyone needs to come to the table with a sense of we're gonna be part of the solution. We are going to sacrifice, knowing that it's going to cause some political pain for everyone involved.
Right, and as you all did your answers there, I think you started to address some of the questions we saw coming from the audience about, okay, what about groundwater management in the rest of the state? And do the cities need to do more? What more can the urban areas do in terms of water conservation, and how much of the puzzle is that? So what I want to think a bit about now is a bit more on what are some of these key future challenges you raised before. What are some of the methods we can do to deal with them? So feel free to address either of those. We had another good question from the audience that got at something we haven't talked about yet, which is if we can position ourselves as leaders in this urban water management, I won't say urban, arid region water management, and sustainability and resilience in general, if we can be leaders in that, is there an economic opportunity here? Is there some economic development that could come to Arizona from being a leader here? But let me just kick that back to both of you for either that question or anything more specific you want to say about.
I'll jump in real quick. I'll let Kathryn answer in a more substantive way. But the truth is, yes, we need to look at our regulatory system, and clearly we need to look. The person that is credited more than anyone else with our innovative, groundbreaking, and still very important Groundwater Management Act, Governor Bruce Babbitt, even he said we need to do more under the current circumstances. So even people that are married to the existing regulatory system acknowledge that more needs to be done. And that is absolutely true. More needs to be done, including looking at groundwater throughout the state. But it can't be done in a heavy-handed way. It has to be done in a sense of partnership and shared sacrifice. We're not going to get the changes necessary unless there's a feeling that everyone's willing to have some skin in this game.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say regarding Arizona's leadership on water issues, yeah, we've done a lot. When you live in an arid state, you understand the value of water. And, our leaders for many generations have understood the importance of reliable water deliveries and have made the investments necessary to make modern life, feasible here in our desert state. I think that something comes from understanding the value of water. And I think that perspective has actually served us really well. And I see when I look across the Western US that in many ways, Arizona is better positioned or even better prepared than other states because they haven't had to face these types of scarcity challenges in the way that we have. So I think that is really important. But the congressman is right. That's great, but we can't rest on those laurels, and we have to continue to do more and push for even more efficient water use. I think in the cities, certainly we've made great headway. And I love this statistic that I think it's so fascinating. Our water use as a whole in the state of Arizona today is roughly the same as it was in the 1950s, but we've added like 6 million people to our population. And that's incredible. We should feel proud about how we've become very water efficient, but we got to do more. And to me, that means in the cities in particular, we need to be looking at denser developments. We need to look really carefully at our land use choices, something, Jim, I think you can appreciate coming from the Lincoln Institute. We have to look carefully at those land use choices. We need to build denser, more vertical cities. The good news is that it takes less water to grow a subdivision than it does to grow cotton, and that's great. But we have to do more. We have to ensure that every last drop of water we use for industry, for agriculture, for our cities, for anything, all of our undertakings, that we are using it as wisely and efficiently as possible. We need to do more with system conservation in Lake Mead, and that is going to mean finding people who are willing to be compensated to use less water and undertaking those voluntary transactions. They are not without controversy. They are not without impact to rural communities. And that's the importance of what the congressman is saying about everyone working collaboratively towards these solutions. We can't be pitted against each other, or else we're just going to fail.
Let me raise two really big picture questions that have come up in some of the questions being submitted by the audience, and as well, I'm thinking of some of the questions that came up when we had our September 8th dialogue, where we had Bruce Babbitt, who you've mentioned, and Brenda Berman, previous reclamation commissioner. So, and maybe I'll also ask if we can add into the chat a link to that September 8th dialogue if anybody wants to watch it. But anyway, two really kind of big picture questions that are coming up. One is do we need to think about growth differently? Can we continue to grow the way we have? Will we be able to manage water well enough that it doesn't become a constraint on that growth, or should we again, should your average local community elected official be thinking about this differently? So that's one kind of big picture question I'll be interested in your reflections on. The other one, if you want to reflect on it, is, as you both know well, we have this whole complex of laws and rules and regulations and treaties that we call the law of the river, that controls how we manage the Colorado River, and it continues to evolve. And both of the story maps that from the Kyl Center as well as the Basin Center up will help you get a bigger picture of that. But are we going to be able to just continue to slowly evolve and tweak those, or do we need some more fundamental changes to the laws and rules that govern us? So either of you that want to jump in first on either of those or other big picture questions you want to address?
Well, I'll jump in real quick on the issue of kind of, is it time for us to grow differently or put restrictions on our growth? Actually, as Kathryn mentioned, the type of growth we're doing, at least in the urban areas, has been very positive from a water perspective. And the investments that we have made, for example, in public transportation and light rail, have directly led to massive investments in dense development. If you look at the heart of our city, you see it looks completely different over the last decade or so than it did previously. So we actually want that kind of urban dense development. It is good from a climate change perspective, it's good from a sustainability perspective, and it is a net positive from a water perspective. So I guess I would politely suggest we want the right kind of growth. But the truth is this: if we don't step up to the plate sooner rather than later, make the tough choices that Kathryn and others are saying we have to make, whether we want growth to continue or not, it will slow down. If the various entities that are looking for where they're going to locate jobs in the future get a sense that Arizona is not willing to make the tough choices as it relates to planning our water future, they're not going to move the type of high quality, high paid jobs that we all desperately want and need in the state of Arizona. So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've got to get this done. We have to be willing to make the shared sacrifice in order to continue with the kind of growth that really will set Arizona up for a much more positive future. Now, I understand, I get the point. I don't want to be naive or Pollyannish about maybe the point that was trying to be made, which is the type of kind of leapfrog development in which we have to continue to build utilities further and further into the desert and single family master plan communities, and whether or not the 100-year guaranteed water supply, whether or not you can, assert that you have that without really having access to the water. It's kind of potentiality of water. Can we kind of continue down that path? That type of growth probably is going to have to change, and we are going to have to look at better planning and better laws as it relates to, if you're going to pull water out of the ground, you can't have hypothetical water to replace. You have to have actual water to replace that groundwater. We've got to be stronger on those type of issues, certainly.
Well, yeah, and I would just add to that, that the Department of Water Resources has already proclaimed that continued growth of the type we've seen in the past can no longer occur in Pinal County on groundwater, for example. So that is a really big issue, and we're going to have to find ways to do better. Absolutely. Jim, you also asked about the law of the river and the degree to which change should be incremental or whether it needs to happen at a faster pace. Is now a good time to talk about that? I know I'm jumping subject a little. Okay.
No, sure. Let's transition to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I get asked this question a lot, actually. So people must be thinking about this quite a bit. And certainly I can understand that, given that the hydrology on the Colorado River is so bad right now. But I believe fundamentally that we're going to have to rely both on drastic change, but also incremental change. And I know that seems contradictory, but I think there's a place for both. Until now, we've been able to avoid worst case outcomes on the Colorado River, even in the face of 22 years of drought and, climate change and decreased snowpack. And we've done that by finding reasonable compromises that tweak rather than break the law of the river. Whether hydrology allows us to continue down that path, I think is an open question. There may need to be some very abrupt changes, and a lot depends on this year's snowpack. And a lot of people do talk about scrapping prior appropriation, which is, our Western system of water rights, which means first in time, first in right, or even starting over on Colorado River allocations. But in general terms, I'm kind of against that. For one thing, literally trillions of dollars of prior investment hinges on those existing rights and entitlements. And if you throw out prior appropriation and existing entitlements, you don't necessarily get something better, but you certainly get chaos and uncertainty. And uncertainty in the provision of water for public health is a really bad thing. So even with the faults and inefficiencies that are kind of inherent in prior appropriation and the law of the Colorado River, we have certainty in property rights, and we know who is entitled to water. We know those rights are exclusive to the entity that owns them, generally transferable and enforceable. And with those three things, with exclusivity, transferability, and enforceability, you can enter into innovative voluntary transactions that create reasonable outcomes for those who are involved. I don't mean to say that that's going to be easy, but I think that we're going to have to find ways to work as best we can within the constructs that we have. But we're seeing that even now. Like I said, with the 500 plus plan, much of that water is going to come from willing transactions, from voluntary transactions between willing participants, mostly tribes and agricultural interests on the river. So these solutions are going to be hard to come by, and they're going to be extremely expensive. And make no mistake about that, but they are feasible. And I think that speaks also to what the congressman was saying about being smart about how we grow. We are going to have to do more. We are going to have to find these types of solutions. But if we do these things wisely, and if we do these things collaboratively, we can continue to grow. We can continue to have a thriving economy, and we can continue to lure, high dollar, high tech jobs into our economy.
The only thing I would add on that is, as a member of Congress, I take my role and responsibility to be an advocate for our tribal communities very, very seriously. You can't be a member of Congress from Arizona and not advocate for the tribes, and whether that be from an economic development perspective, transportation infrastructure development, delivery of water, broadband, and also water rights. And so the only area I would add is that one thing we can do in Congress is working in partnership with our tribal communities, but is to work to get as many of the settlements completed as possible, so we know what the playing field is relative to who has rights to the water. That still isn't completed, and that's important work that we have to get done in Congress. Kathryn worked for the Kyl Center, and Senator Kyl, we owe him a huge debt of gratitude, because he did a lot of work in that regard. You don't get a lot of votes by working on tribal water rights, but it's really important for the entire state of Arizona, and our delegation needs to step up and do even more to get those done. So it's a key piece of the puzzle.
Very good point. And in a minute here, I'm going to switch to giving both of our speakers the chance to make some kind of concluding final comments, some highlights. What I'll also suggest, if you want to scan through some of the questions that have come in, you may see something there that you want to throw into your closing comments as well. One thing I wanted to share is, for those interested in learning more about the tribal issues, we'll put a link in here, but if you Google the Water and Tribes Initiative, it's a program that we and the Walton Family Foundation and Catena Foundation fund, and they are doing a lot of work. They have a lot of reports out in terms of tribal water issues, and some of the work they have done on access to clean water has been able to have a real impact on some of the infrastructure bills that the congressman would be very much of an expert on as they've been working their way through Congress. But there's been some genuine help, I think, long overdue help for the tribal communities that's been getting built into those bills. Congressman, would you like to go first in terms of sort of some concluding thoughts, maybe some points that you had hoped would come up but didn't yet, that now's your chance to put them on the table?
Well, we covered just about everything from a policy perspective, a very thorough conversation. So I'm really excited that Lincoln Institute asked me to participate in today's conversation. But let me maybe take it in a different direction. One of the challenges that Kathryn had when she led the largest water department in the state of Arizona is finding people. We need more people, workforce, to be interested in this area, working in our various water utilities, because that's where the future leadership is coming from, those that work in those arenas. And those people become, born of their experience, leaders on thinking about these solutions on the larger policy issues. We're struggling with that. We have an aging workforce, not only at the city, but in this field overall. We're not attracting people, who are in high school and college now, are not thinking about this enough. And yet, this might be the most important issue facing our state and the future economy of the state of Arizona, is getting this issue right. All of the success that we've had, all the growth, positive growth that we've seen, is going to be all for naught. We can't let that occur. So my appeal to everyone watching this is to get more involved. Think about that aspect of all. If you know someone in your family or friends that are thinking about what their career might be, think about a career in a public utility like a water department, and think about the policy implications of water. We need to bring that next generation of thinkers, because probably the idea that's going to solve all of it is one that none of us are thinking right now. We need new people at the table, new creative mindset. So I know I take it a little bit of a different direction, but every time we pass a bill in Congress, when it comes to investment, we have to add a workforce development component of that. It's critically important.
Well, I'll just say to that, the congressman is not wrong. That was one of our biggest challenges running the utility. It's really difficult to compete for skilled labor, electricians and crews, IT professionals. Running a water sewer industry is one of the most complicated, capital intensive undertakings that humans effectuate. And finding the talent for it is a huge challenge. So yeah, I agree with all of that. I guess I would just say that, obviously I'm an optimist. I believe that the solutions are known, they're feasible, they're politically difficult and they're expensive. But I think that these are challenges that we can overcome. I don't want to minimize them. There is true crisis on the Colorado River, but I absolutely believe that we can and will work collaboratively together to support public health, to continue the provision of safe, clean, reliable water deliveries to families and homes and businesses across the basin. But I also just want to put things in context, because I think it is helpful for people to remember that solving for water scarcity is hard. It is. And the problems we face are big. But at the end of the day, solving for water scarcity is technologically easier and probably less expensive than solving for flooding and seawater intrusion, which involves not moving a small amount of water to where it is today, to where it needs to go tomorrow, but rather involves moving vast amounts of water out of places where it does harm. Every city has its challenge, every community has its challenge, but people are smart. We make good use of technology, and we're able to collaborate, and those things can see us through with leadership.
Thank you. I'll share just a few thoughts as we come to our last minute or so here. And that is that, as both Kathryn and the congressman have said, I believe that open and widespread dialogue and engagement is really critical to us finding our solutions, and anything as a larger community we can do to support that is very good. I think it's also important, as we said before, that we're able to maintain a problem-solving mentality, that we're able to keep water politics as isolated as we can from partisan politics, and even to keep water politics isolated from sort of the traditional log rolling. Hey, I'll give you your highway interchange if you'll give me your water project. I mean, by and large, we've been able to solve water issues amongst themselves, and hopefully we'll continue to. And in fact, in some ways, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, the way we have dealt with water issues, I think actually serves as a good example of the healthier type dialogue we need to try to bring back into the rest of our politics. So hopefully we can do that. So for the work of the Babbitt Center, much of our focus, we are focused on the Colorado Basin, but we are focused on integrating land and water. So I invite you to look to our website to see some of what we've put out on that. And I'll mention that a really new initiative that we'll start working on and do some dialogues about is looking at agricultural futures. How do we look at the long-term sustainable future for our agricultural production in communities and partnerships between agriculture and urban and tribal interest? How do we bring them all together? Maybe the last thing I'll share, just because it came up in a question, and if there's a 15-second soundbite that either of our panelists want to add to it, I'll invite them to do that. But there really was a question about, are people beginning to develop a consensus perspective about what the reality is on the Colorado River? And what I would share is, I think despite ongoing lack of political consensus in the Southwest, at least amongst our elected officials, about what causes climate change, is it happening, isn't it happening, is this just a drought, or is it something bigger and longer term? What I would say is I really believe the water management community recognizes not only do we have drought and wet cycles, we have a long-term climate change that is reducing our supply, and they are very focused on the best models they can do to understand that and deal with it. So I think within the water management community, people have gotten real, and they are looking for solutions that will carry us forth. Any last snippet of comment before we close down, Congressman, Kathryn?
Well, Jim, it was great to hear your perspective on things. You and I have worked together for over 20 years, and this event was the longest time you and I had a conversation where you didn't have the opportunity to express an opinion. So I'm glad you got it in there, because you're one of the smartest guys I know when it comes to land use and planning and environmental issues and water. So thank you for adding that expertise.
I did have to step out of the moderator role for at least a minute.
It was super fun. Thank you so much for including the Kyl Center in the conversation.
Well, thank you to both of you. Thank you to our audience for listening. As I said, we will send an email out to everyone to let you know where to find this broadcast, and to let you know about some of these future conversations we'll be having on the ag future. So again, thank you, everyone. Congressman, I'm glad you were able to give us as much time as you're able to give us. I know you're very busy and doing important work, and Kathryn as well. It's always a pleasure to talk with both of you. So
a great one.
Thank you.
Fun. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.